Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show dedicated to cutting through all the noise, delivering the essential knowledge you need to be, well, truly well-informed. Today, we're plunging into a topic that, honestly, for many folks, feels like a complex maze. Cybersecurity compliance. Does navigating just the sheer volume of laws, regulations, industry standards, does it ever feel like it's an impossible task? Just keeping track.
Oh, absolutely. You're definitely not alone in feeling that way. It's a huge challenge.
Right, because the reality is organizations aren't just dealing with, one single set of rules.
No, not at all.
They're constantly juggling multiple requirements, often overlapping ones. And they come from different bodies, serve different purposes, and maybe most critically, carry really distinct penalties if you mess up.
Exactly. It can be incredibly daunting, like trying to follow, I don't know, a dozen different maps all pointing in slightly different directions.
That's a great way to put it. But that's precisely why we're here today. This deep dive, we're designing it to be your shortcut, to understanding this really intricate landscape. Our mission today is to unpack the most crucial regulatory frameworks and compliance structures.
Yeah.
The ones that are absolutely essential if you're pursuing CISSP certification.
Or frankly, even if you're not, but just want a really solid grasp of the cybersecurity ecosystem.
Exactly. And while we'll focus quite a bit on U.S. regulations, because they're so foundational, we'll definitely integrate the key global standards where they apply. Can't ignore those.
No, you really can't these days.
So we promise we'll extract the most important nuggets. We'll clarify the purpose, the scope, the technical requirements for each framework, and, maybe most importantly, reveal exactly how each one aligns with those 8 CISSP domains.
Yeah, that mapping is crucial for exam prep.
Totally. And we'll try to pepper in some, surprising facts, practical examples, real-world stuff to keep it interesting. Think of it like we're giving you the blueprints, maybe the roadmaps to help you stay on track.
Like building codes for a city?
Right, or like detailed sheet music so you can play a really complex symphony without hitting a wrong note.
I like that analogy.
Ready to unpack this?
Let's do it.
Okay, so as we embark on this deep dive, it's pretty clear that cybersecurity compliance can feel like navigating that vast, complex map we talked about. Laws, standards.
It's a lot.
It is. And it's not just knowing what to do, is it? It's understanding how to do it and, frankly, for whom you're doing it.
That's key. The context matters immensely.
And this is where the whole concept of frameworks really comes into play. They are, essentially they're the blueprints for building robust security programs.
Right. The structure.
Yeah, the structure.
Yeah.
So when we talk about frameworks, things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or maybe the globally recognized ISO 27001 one, we're talking about structured guidance. They meticulously spell out the purpose, the scope, the specific technical requirements for your security measures.
And they give you a common language, too.
Exactly. And importantly, these aren't just like suggestions. They're often enforced, right?
Yeah.
By regulators or industry bodies. They have real teeth.
Definitely. There are consequences for noncompliance.
For sure. And NIST itself, if you look at their own site, they're pretty clear. They say the frameworks help organizations, all kinds of organizations,
Right.
meet their cybersecurity goals. They
Yeah.
provide guidance on activities, outcomes.
Is guidance to get you there.
Right. The NIST CSF specifically, they say it's a powerful tool to better understand and improve their management of cybersecurity risk.
Which is huge.
And then the NIST Risk Management Framework, the RMF, that integrates security and privacy risk management across the whole system lifecycle.
From cradle to grave, essentially.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's incredibly comprehensive guidance.
Yeah, it really is. And what's truly insightful, I think, about all these compliance regimes, despite, their varied origins, is just how much they actually overlap. There's a remarkable amount of common ground.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's not entirely separate worlds.
Yeah. Not at all. And this is precisely where that practical CISSP level knowledge really shines. It helps you turn potential chaos into, a strategic advantage.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just know about each law or standard. You really need to understand its core purpose, its specific scope, the detailed requirements it lays out, and crucially, how it's actually enforced.
Okay.
And of course, for CISSP, you've got to grasp how each of these maps directly to those 8 domains.
Right. That connection is key.
Think of it like conducting a complex orchestra. Each section, strings, brass, percussion, maybe represents a different compliance requirement.
Okay, I follow.
An organization isn't just playing one tune. Often it needs to satisfy HIPAA and PCI DSS and maybe SOX all at the same time.
Wow, yeah.
And while each has its own distinct controls, its own nuances, there are many similar underlying security principles running through them all.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Exactly. The practical outcome is that instead of building, say, 3 separate siloed security programs, a savvy organization builds a unified program. Ah, okay. One program to rule them all. Sort of.
Sort of, yeah. A single, cohesive program designed to address all the applicable requirements together. And in this analogy, those security frameworks, like NIST CSF or the RMF, they provide the sheet music.
Got it. The structure, the notes.
Exactly. They give you the structure and the notes you need to play everything in harmony, making sure you don't miss a single requirement. It's this unified approach that helps you navigate that, winding highway of requirements.
The frameworks being your roadmaps.
Precisely. Keeping your organization firmly on track and stopping you from accidentally veering off into non-compliance.
That analogy of orchestrating compliance, it paints a really vivid picture. It also makes me wonder, though, when organizations are trying to actually implement these frameworks, what's one of the biggest, practical roadblocks they hit?
Oh, that's a great question. Because it gets right to the heart of real-world application, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'd say one of the biggest challenges isn't just understanding what the frameworks say, but translating that into actionable, really integrated security controls across all their diverse systems.
Okay, so the doing part is hard.
The doing part is hard, and doing it consistently. For instance, an organization might focus really hard on securing a specific system for PCI DSS compliance.
Right.
But then they realize those same controls don't automatically align perfectly with, say, the more nuanced privacy requirements of GDPR, or maybe HIPAA's specific safeguards.
So it's not always a perfect one-to-one map.
Exactly. The roadblock often becomes the tactical execution. Getting those common principles implemented consistently across the entire enterprise and making sure they're not just checkboxes ticked off, but are genuinely effective security measures.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so with that foundational understanding of how frameworks provide those crucial blueprints, let's now start our deep dive into some specific ones. We'll kick off with some prominent U.S.-centric frameworks. These really form the backbone of so many security programs, both in federal agencies and private industry.
Sounds good. Where are we starting?
Let's start with the NIST frameworks, the cybersecurity framework, CSF, the risk management framework, RMF, and also Special Publication 853.
Okay, the big 3 from NIST.
Right. Developed by the U.S. federal government, their main purpose is to guide risk management for information systems. Pretty straightforward. The cybersecurity framework, the CSF, that's a voluntary set of best practices. It's famously structured around those 5 core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover.
Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover.
Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Yep.
Got it.
And while it was originally aimed at critical infrastructure, it's been super widely adopted across all sorts of industries. Why? Because it offers this really clear, big-picture view of your security posture. It helps you understand and improve how you manage cybersecurity risk.
It's very intuitive, I think. That's part of its appeal.
Definitely.
And complementing the CSF, you have the Risk Management Framework, the RMF. That's laid out in NIST SP 837. This isn't just, general guidance. It's a specific prescriptive process.
A process, okay.
Yeah, designed to make sure federal systems follow a full lifecycle approach to security. It starts right from system categorization, figuring out what you have and how important it is.
Okay.
And it goes all the way through to continuous monitoring, making sure security is baked in from the start, not just bolted on later.
Right. Security by design, essentially.
Exactly. And then there's NIST SP 853. This is where you find the real granular detail. It provides literally hundreds of specific security and privacy controls.
Hundreds. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Hundreds. Now, primarily, it's designed for U.S. federal information systems. But these controls are so robust, so comprehensive, that many private organizations actually adopt them too as their own benchmark for strong security. They see the value.
So they're kind of like a gold standard, even if not strictly required outside government.
Precisely. They're seen as best practice. Now, here's a crucial point, especially for anyone studying for the CISSP. NIST guidelines themselves, they aren't laws.
Okay, that's important. They're not legislation.
Correct. However, there's a significant U.S. law, FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, which makes adherence to NIST standards mandatory for federal agencies and their contractors.
Okay. So FISMA enforces NIST for federal entities.
You got it. Under FISMA, federal agencies absolutely must conduct thorough risk assessments. They have to meticulously select the right controls from SP 853 for their systems. They have to document everything, rigorously test the effectiveness of those controls, formally authorize their systems to operate.
Like getting a license to run.
Exactly like that. And then critically, they have to continuously monitor those controls. So when FISMA mandates it, NIST compliance really boils down to comprehensive risk management and just unwavering adherence to those documented, tested controls.
And it's ongoing, not a one-time check.
Absolutely. That's a common misconception. Compliance isn't a project with an end date. Under FISMA, it's about continuous authorization. Your security posture is constantly being evaluated and reaffirmed.
Okay, continuous authorization. Got it. And what about enforcement? Who checks if agencies are actually doing this?
Well, within the federal government, it's primarily the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and also the individual agencies' inspectors general, the IGs. They're the ones auditing FISMA compliance, basically checking that those NIST controls are being followed properly.
Okay, so internal government checks.
Mostly, yeah. Now, for private industry, as we said, the CSF is voluntary, but it's widely seen as that gold standard best practice. In fact, some state laws, like New York's cybersecurity regulations for financial services, they actually reference NIST frameworks explicitly. So it's becoming influential even outside the federal sphere.
Definitely. So while you won't get fined directly for not following the CSF per se, if you fail to follow NIST controls when they are legally required, like under FISMA, or a state law that points to NIST, they can absolutely lead to formal audit findings and orders to remediate.
Right, so the requirement comes via another law or regulation.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the CISSP mapping. It's really remarkable how universally these NIST frameworks connect to the domains. They honestly cut across all 8 domains.
All 8? Wow.
Pretty much. For example, when you use the RMF process, you're deeply engaging with security and risk management, which is domain 1, right?
Right.
System categorization, risk assessments, that's core domain 1 stuff.
Makes sense.
Then, as you select and implement specific controls from SP 800-53, you're directly applying principles from security, architecture, and engineering, which is domain 3.
Okay.
If those controls relate to network configuration, firewalls, segmentation, you're squarely in communication and network security domain 4.
Got it.
And all those ongoing activities, continuous monitoring, incident response, which are baked into the RMF, they fall directly into security operations domain 7.
So it really touches everything.
It really does. So mastering the NIST frameworks isn't just about ticking a compliance box. It genuinely means you're mastering a significant chunk of the entire CISSP curriculum itself.
That's a really powerful connection. It really drives home why understanding NIST is so vital. And just to quickly recap those 6 crucial steps of the RMF process that agencies follow.
Yeah, let's list them.
They need to categorize their systems first.
Yeah.
Then select the right security controls, implement those controls, assess if they're working effectively, authorize the system to actually operate, and finally, monitor continuously.
Categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, monitor. Yep, that's the cycle.
That structure seems really key to ensuring ongoing compliance.
It absolutely is. It forces a methodical approach.
So if NIST provides the blueprints for sound security, then FISMA, for federal agencies at least, is kind of like the enforcement body, the building inspector making sure the blueprints are followed.
That's a perfect way to think about it. Moving right into FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act. Remember, it was enacted back in 2002, updated in 2014. It's a foundational U.S. law. Its core purpose: mandate that federal agencies, and importantly, any contractors handling federal data, secure their information systems properly.
Okay.
You can really think of FISMA as that overarching umbrella law. It compels federal entities to appoint security officers, diligently assess risks, implement effective controls.
And those controls usually come from?
Almost always drawn directly from NIST SP 853. FISMA basically codifies the need for security programs and points agencies towards those NIST standards.
Okay. So what does FISMA compliance actually require on the ground, like day-to-day?
Good question. Practically speaking, each federal agency has to conduct a comprehensive inventory of all its information systems. Know what you have.
Step 1.
Right. Then they have to perform annual risk assessments and rigorous security testing. They must implement what FISMA calls adequate controls again, usually from NIST SP 853. And then they have to consistently report their compliance status up the chain to OMB and to Congress.
Wow. Reporting to Congress, that's serious.
It is. And what's more, FISMA's reach has broadened. It now clearly applies to modern tech like IoT devices used by agencies and cloud services they consume.
So it keeps evolving.
It has to. Let's take a practical example. Imagine a new federal web application is being developed.
Okay.
Before it can even launch, it must be meticulously categorized based on its potential impact if breached. Specific SP 853 controls must be implemented and thoroughly tested. And then a senior official, an authorizing official, has to formally sign off, authorizing to operate.
The license again?
Exactly. And after launch, continuous monitoring kicks in immediately. Ongoing vulnerability scans, audits, reviews, all mandatory to maintain that authorization.
Okay, so it's a very structured, formalized process. What about enforcement if an agency slips up?
Right. The enforcement for FISMA tends to stay primarily internal to the government. You've got the inspectors general within various agencies issuing regular audit reports. And OMB itself has the power to publish agency grades on their security performance, sort of a public scorecard.
Ah, public shaming can be a motivator.
It can be. While there isn't like a direct monetary fine for the average citizen if an agency is non-compliant, the consequences for the agency can be serious. Things like budget cuts or mandates for extensive, often costly remediation plans.
So internal pressure and budget implications.
Exactly. It's like that building inspector analogy for federal IT. Before a new security building and information system can open, it has to meet all those NIST code requirements, get signed off by a high-level official, and then be regularly inspected to ensure it stays up to standard.
Makes sense. And connecting this back to the bigger picture for CISSP candidates,
Yeah.
FISMA's strong emphasis on rigorous risk assessment and that formal authorization to operate, the ATO process.
Yeah. That ties directly into Domain 1, security and risk management. It's textbook risk management.
Oh.
The requirement for a plan of action and milestones, a POA&M to track and fix vulnerabilities, and the whole continuous monitoring aspect, that deeply relates to Domain 7 security operations.
Right, keeping things running securely.
Exactly. And, of course, the actual selection and implementation of controls from NIST SP 800-53 inherently involves expertise from Domain 3, security architecture and engineering, Domain 4, communication and network security, and Domain 5, identity and access management. You're building the system to meet those federal requirements.
Got it. It really reinforces how interconnected these domains are in practice.
Absolutely. You rarely operate in just one domain silo.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Let's turn our attention now to HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act.
Ah, IIPA. Everyone's heard of HIPAA.
Pretty much, especially if you've been to a doctor's office. This is a crucial U.S. law specifically designed to protect what's called protected health information, or PHI.
Your sensitive medical data.
Exactly. HIPAA basically has two main parts we need to think about. There's the privacy rule, which dictates how your PHI can be used and shared. And then there's the security rule, which is focused specifically on securing electronic PHI or ePHI.
The digital records.
Right. And this law applies broadly. It covers what are called covered entities. Think healthcare providers, hospitals, clinics, health insurance plans, healthcare clearinghouses, and also, importantly, their business associates. These are organizations that perform services for those covered entities and handle PHI as part of that service, like a billing company or a cloud storage provider for a hospital.
Right. The scope is wider than just the doctor's office itself.
Definitely.
So diving into the compliance requirements for HIPAA's security rule, it gets quite specific. Organizations must implement administrative safeguards.
Like what?
Things like conducting a thorough risk analysis, that's a big one, developing robust security policies and procedures, managing workforce security, like training and background checks.
Okay, administrative stuff.
Then there are physical safeguards, controlling access to facilities where ePHI is stored, securing workstations and devices, things like that.
Locks on doors, screen locks.
Pretty much. And finally, technical safeguards are required. This involves implementing access controls to ePHI who can see what, establishing audit logs to track activity, and ensuring encryption where it's deemed reasonable and appropriate for data both at rest and in transit.
Encryption is key.
It is. And what's truly surprising, maybe, is how many organizations, even today, still struggle with that mandated risk analysis, really identifying all the locations where ePHI exists and figuring out the vulnerabilities that could impact it. It's a foundational step, but it's often underestimated.
So finding all the data is the first hurdle.
It really is. Furthermore, a critical element is the breach notification procedure. If PHI is compromised, organizations have strict rules about notifying affected patients and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS.
Right, you hear about those breach notifications.
You do. And the privacy rule, separate but related, mandates getting patient consent for certain uses of PHI, providing clear notices about privacy practices, and sticking to a minimum necessary standard for a disclosure. Only share what you absolutely need to.
Minimum necessary. Got it. Who enforces all this? Enforcement for HIPAA falls primarily under the HHS Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. They conduct proactive audits, but they also respond to complaints filed by individuals.
So they can come knocking even if there hasn't been a breach reported.
Oh, yeah. And let me tell you, the fines for HIPAA violations can be incredibly steep. We're talking potentially up to $1.5 million per year for recurring violations of the same provision.
Wow, that's serious money.
It is. And in really severe cases, if someone knowingly misuses PHI for personal gain or malicious harm, criminal charges can even be brought.
Whoa.
Yeah. A really notable, impactful case that highlights the financial sting was the Anthem Inc. settlement. Remember that massive breach back in 2015?
Vaguely, yeah. Huge number of records, wasn't it?
Nearly 79 million patient records exposed, primarily through a cyber attack that used stolen administrative credentials. The OCR investigation afterwards found Anthem just lacked appropriate security measures. It resulted in a massive $16 million ATAFE settlement.
$16 million.
Yep. It's still one of the largest high PR fines ever. It really underscores just how seriously HHS takes these security failures.
No kidding. So, from a CISSP perspective, where does HIPAA fit? Well, IP strongly underscores asset security, which is Domain 2. It's all about meticulously classifying and safeguarding that highly sensitive PHI throughout its entire life cycle.
Protecting the asset.
Exactly. It also deeply involves risk management, Domain 1, through those mandatory risk analyses we talked about. That's a core risk activity.
Okay.
For security operations, Domain 7, IPA emphasizes the importance of having robust incident response plans ready to go and maintaining comprehensive logs of who accessed ePHI and when. Audit trails are critical.
Tracing activity.
Right. And for communication and network security, Domain 4, encryption of data in transit and often at rest, is a key technical safeguard consideration. Furthermore, elements of the privacy rule intersect with Domain 1 concerning those legal and regulatory requirements, and also Domain 6, security assessment and testing, because organizations have to regularly audit their compliance with both the privacy and security rules to ensure patient data stays protected.
So it hits quite a few domains, too.
It does. I'd say maybe the trickiest part for a CISSP professional dealing with HIPAA often involves just the sheer volume and the distributed nature of PHI.
Yeah.
It's often spread across so many disparate systems, EHRs, billing systems, imaging systems, third-party portals.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Exactly. Making consistent application of strong security controls across all those different environments is a significant operational challenge.
I can imagine it's almost like trying to guard medical records in a huge, sprawling hospital complex where they're not just in one secure records room anymore. They're on laptops, tablets, in the cloud, with partners. You need those physical locks on cabinets, sure, but also strong digital locks, strict electronic sign-in logs, clear policies ensuring only the right doctors or nurses can access specific patient files, no matter where that data resides. Yeah. It's layers and layers of protection for incredibly sensitive data.
That's a great way to visualize it. Layers are key.
Okay, let's shift from healthcare to finance, kind of. Yeah. Let's talk about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX.
SOX, another big one, especially for public companies.
Right. Enacted back in 2002, SOX was primarily a response to those major corporate accounting scandals around that time, Enron, WorldCom.
Yeah, trying to restore investor confidence.
Exactly. Its main goal was to improve corporate financial accountability and transparency. Now, it's not strictly a cybersecurity law in the way PCI or PCI DSS are.
No, it's about financial reporting.
Right. But its requirements have absolutely profound implications for IT security. This law specifically applies to public companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges and also their external auditors. It forces them to ensure accurate financial reporting and establish really robust internal controls over those financial processes.
And IT systems are almost always involved in financial processes today.
Absolutely, which is where the IT implications come in.
So SOX includes several key sections that have a direct impact on IT. For instance, Section 302. This requires that CEOs and CFOs personally sign their names to the fact that their company's internal controls, and this explicitly includes IT controls, are effective.
Personal accountability at the top.
Huge personal accountability. Then Section 404 takes it even further. It demands that both the company's management and their external auditors report on the effectiveness of those internal controls over financial reporting, what's called ICFR.
So double checks, management reports, auditors report.
Exactly. Now, in practical IT terms, what does this mean? It means companies must have meticulous processes for tracking and protecting all financial data.
Like audit trails.
Comprehensive audit trails, yes. Logs of who changed financial records, when, what they changed. Ensuring secure storage for critical financial databases. Having robust disaster recovery plans in place to preserve the integrity and availability of that financial data.
Can't lose the financial records.
Definitely not. SOX also imposes specific data retention rules. Companies typically have to keep audit documents and related financial records for 7 years.
7 years.
A common pitfall, I think, is organizations underestimating the depth of IT controls required by SOX. It's not just about having firewalls. It's really about ensuring the integrity and the auditability of every single financial transaction and the systems that support it. Change management, access control, data validation, it all comes under scrutiny.
Integrity and auditability.
Got it.
Who enforces SOX? The enforcement is overseen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And non-compliance can lead to really severe penalties. We're talking substantial fines for the company itself and potentially even criminal charges for executives involved in financial misrepresentation or fraud.
Criminal charges.
Wow. We saw that with infamous cases like the Tyco executives who faced prison time for falsifying records and misusing corporate funds. Those charges were brought directly under SOX provisions. It really shows how seriously this law is taken, especially regarding the accuracy and integrity of financial information reported to the public.
Okay, so the stakes are very high for executives. How does SOX map to the CISSP domains? Well, it definitely touches security and risk management, Domain 1, through its heavy emphasis on policies, corporate governance, and that C-level accountability for internal controls.
Right, the governance piece.
Asset security, Domain 2, comes into play by requiring the proper classification, protection, and retention of those critical financial records. They're a key asset. The real heart of SOX compliance, from an IT perspective, often lies in audit and assessment, Domain 6. Because it mandates that rigorous evaluation and testing of internal controls, auditors play a huge role.
Makes sense.
And finally, security operations, Domain 7, is crucial for maintaining those meticulous logs we talked about, ensuring proper backups for all financial data to prove integrity and allow for recovery, and managing changes to financial systems securely.
Okay, so it connects across several areas too. Here's a quick anecdote that perfectly illustrates that IT impact of SOX. I remember hearing about a company that actually failed a SOX audit.
Oh, yeah. Why?
Because a developer had carelessly left some old debug accounts enabled on a production database.
Yeah.
Database that stored critical financial information.
Ouch. Production database.
Yeah. It seemed like a small oversight, maybe just sloppy housekeeping related to access control.
Right.
But it spiraled into a major audit finding because it represented an uncontrolled access path. Expert, what's the deeper lesson there in terms of SOX from that kind of incident?
Oh, that's a classic example. And the deeper lesson is absolutely critical for understanding SOX. It's not just about preventing external hackers from getting in. SOX is profoundly about internal controls and ensuring the integrity of financial data from within.
Internal threats or mistakes.
Exactly. A debug account might seem innocuous to a developer, maybe just a tool they forgot to remove. But from a SOX perspective, it represents an unauthorized pathway to financial systems, a pathway that likely bypasses standard change management procedures and access control reviews.
Right, it circumvents the process.
Precisely. SOX demands absolute accountability and traceability for every change and every access related to financial data. That example perfectly highlights how even seemingly minor IT security gaps, things that might be low risk from a pure hacking perspective, can become huge compliance-critical issues under SOX if they impact the accuracy, integrity, or reliability of financial reporting. It really reveals how crucial internal processes, strict access management, and rigorous change control are.
That's a fantastic illustration of how IT security directly intersects with financial integrity under SOX. Great example.
Hmm.
Okay, let's move on to another vital U.S. law. This one also focused on the financial sector. GLBA, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act.
GLBA, right. Sometimes called the Financial Services Modernization Act?
Exactly. Enacted back in 1999, this law specifically governs financial institutions, banks, credit unions, insurance companies, securities firms.
Pretty broad financial scope.
Very broad. Its core purpose is protecting customers' private financial information, often referred to as non-public personal information, or NPI. GLBA is actually made up of several key components. There's the Safeguards Rule, which focuses specifically on the security measures needed to protect that customer data.
Okay, the security part.
Then there's the Financial Privacy Rule, which requires institutions to provide customers with clear notices about their privacy policies and how their information is shared. Right. And finally, there are the pretexting provisions, which make it illegal to obtain customer information under false pretenses, like impersonating someone to get their account details.
Protecting against social engineering, essentially.
Basically, yeah. So for compliance, what does GLBA actually demand?
Well, the big requirement is that financial firms must develop, implement, and rigorously maintain a written information security program.
A formal, documented program.
Yes. The Safeguards Rule in particular gets quite demanding here. It requires administrative, technical, and physical measures to protect that customer NPI.
Examples?
Sure. Things like implementing strong encryption for sensitive data, providing comprehensive employee training on data security responsibilities, regularly testing the effectiveness of the security safeguards put in place.
Seems reasonable.
It is. But here's a somewhat surprising insight. While GLBA mandates having a program, it actually gives financial institutions a fair amount of flexibility on how they implement it. It emphasizes a risk-based approach.
So not a rigid checklist like PCI DSS might be.
Exactly. It needs to be tailored to the specific size, complexity, and operations of that financial institution. It's not one size fits all. It requires them to conduct risk assessments and implement controls appropriate to those risks.
Okay, risk-based.
And the privacy rule further specifies that firms must inform customers about how their data is shared and, crucially, provide them with clear options to opt out if they don't want their information shared with certain non-affiliated third parties. It's all about transparency and giving customers control.
Opt-out rights. Got it.
Yeah.
Who enforces GLBA? Enforcement is actually handled by several different bodies, depending on the type of institution. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, enforces it against most non-bank financial institutions.
Okay.
For banks, credit unions, and similar depository institutions, it's the federal banking agencies like the Fed, the FDIC, the OCC. And state attorneys general can also initiate enforcement actions under GLBA.
So multiple potential enforcement.
Yeah. Penalties for noncompliance can include injunctions ordering firms to stop certain practices and significant monetary fines.
Okay. And the CISSP mapping for GLBA. Like many of these frameworks we've discussed, GLBA spans multiple domains. It clearly touches Domain 1, security and risk management, through its governance requirements, the need for that formal written security program, and the risk assessment component.
Right, the program itself.
Domain 3, security, architecture, and engineering, is critical in designing and implementing the actual protective measures and controls required by the Safeguards Rule.
Building the defenses.
Domain 5, identity and access management, plays a key role in controlling who can access sensitive customer financial data, NPI. And Domain 7, security operations, is involved in the ongoing monitoring, review, and testing of these security measures to ensure they remain effective.
Okay. Pretty broad coverage again.
It is. And it's worth noting here, as a practical point, many financial organizations find themselves needing to comply with both the GLBA and PCI DSS.
Right. If they handle card payments. Exactly. If they process, store, or transmit credit or debit card data, PCI DSS kicks in alongside GLBA's requirements for other NPI. This means they need careful alignment between both sets of rules to avoid duplicating effort, but ensure comprehensive coverage for all types of sensitive financial data they handle. It's another perfect example of that co-compliance challenge we need to talk more about.
Definitely a common scenario in finance, juggling GLBA and PCI.
Okay, our deep dive now needs to expand its view. We're going beyond U.S. law specifically and looking at global standards and some critical industry-specific mandates. These are absolutely crucial for comprehensive cybersecurity knowledge, especially for CISSP.
Right. The world is interconnected. Can't just focus on one country's rules.
Exactly. Let's start with the big one, PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard.
PCI. near and dear to the heart of anyone who takes credit cards.
Right. And it's really important to clarify right off the bat, PCI DSS is an industry standard. It's not technically a government law.
That's a key distinction.
It's mandated by the major card brands themselves. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, JCB. They created it to protect credit and debit card data. And this standard applies to any organization, anywhere in the world, that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data. Doesn't matter if you're a giant online retailer, a small physical hotel, or a local restaurant taking cards.
If you touch the card data, you're in scope.
You're in scope. And if you don't comply, you face consequences directly from the banks or the card brands, things like fines or even losing your ability to accept card payments altogether. That could kill a business.
Yeah, the stakes are very high. So what does PCI DSS actually require? It's known for being pretty prescriptive, right?
Oh, very prescriptive.
The PCI DSS compliance requirements are incredibly detailed. They're structured around 12 main requirements, which are then grouped into 6 logical categories or goals.
Okay, 12 requirements.
Yep. These include things like Goal 1, build and maintain a secure network. This means implementing robust firewalls, proper configurations, and a big one, never using vendor-supplied defaults for system passwords or security parameters.
Just change those default passwords.
Absolutely. Goal 2 is protect cardholder data. This demands strong encryption for data at rest, stored data, and data in transit when it's moving across networks.
Encrypt everywhere.
Pretty much. Goal 3 is maintain a vulnerability management program. This involves installing and regularly updating antivirus software, developing secure systems and applications, and ensuring all systems are properly patched against known vulnerabilities.
Patching.
Crucial. Goal 4 is implement strong access control measures. This requires unique identification for each person with computer access, implementing the principle of least privilege, only giving access needed for the job, and restricting physical access to cardholder data as well.
Locks and logs.
Both physical and digital. Goal 5 is regularly monitor and test networks. This involves tracking user access, regularly testing security systems and processes, like through penetration testing and vulnerability scans and reviewing logs.
Watching the watchers.
You got it. And finally, Goal 6 is maintain an information security policy. Every compliant organization needs a formal policy that addresses information security for all personnel.
A guiding document.
Right. Now, in practice, this translates into needing highly detailed network diagrams that clearly show where card data flows, conducting quarterly external vulnerability scans by an approved scanning vendor, ASV, and depending on the merchant level, undergoing annual audits by a qualified security assessor, a QSA.
USA audits, yeah.
The surprising thing for many organizations new to PCI is just how prescriptive it is compared to frameworks like NIST CSF or ISO 27001. PCI often dictates specific controls, configurations, and even timelines for actions like patching. It's much less flexible in many areas.
Less room for interpretation.
Much less.
And when it comes to enforcement, the consequences for noncompliance are severe, especially if a data breach occurs involving card data.
Right, that's when the hammer really falls.
If a breach happens and the investigation finds the merchant was non-compliant with PCI DSS, the acquiring banks, the merchant's bank, can impose hefty fines. These can run into thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars per month until compliance is validated. Ouch. Per month, yeah. And they can also mandate expensive forensic investigations by a PCI forensic investigator, PFI. We've seen those incredibly high-profile breaches, right? Like Target in 2013, Home Depot in 2014.
Huge news stories. Millions of cards compromised.
Exactly. Target involved malware installed on point-of-sale systems, over 40 million card numbers stolen. Home Depot faced a similar attack, over 50 million cards compromised. Both cases resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in costs, including fines, legal settlements, and remediation efforts, all stemming from PCI noncompliance playing a role in the breach's success or severity. It's a massive financial and reputational hit.
Definitely shows the impact. So for CISSP, where does PCI DSS fit in the domains? Well, the PCI DSS requirements hit multiple domains very hard. Domain 3, security architecture and engineering, is heavily involved, especially with network security requirements like firewalls and, critically, network segmentation to isolate the cardholder data environment, CD.
Segmentation is huge for PCI.
Absolutely. Domain 5, identity and access management, is critical for meeting the strong access control requirements, unique IDs, least privilege, password controls. Domain 6, security assessment and testing, is fundamental. PCI DSS itself mandates regular testing, vulnerability scanning, penetration penetration testing, and log reviews.
Built-in assessment.
Right. And Domain 7, security operations, is highlighted through requirements for comprehensive logging, monitoring of security events, and having an incident response plan specifically for cardholder data breaches.
Okay, so very focused on specific technical and operational controls.
Very much so.
Now, that Target breach you mentioned is such a classic real-world example. And it famously originated, didn't it, from credentials stolen from an HVAC vendor, a third party.
That's right. An external vendor who had network access for monitoring systems.
Expert. That really highlights a critical vulnerability, doesn't it? The whole supply chain third-party risk thing.
Yeah.
How did that specific incident change the PCI DSS landscape and its emphasis for organizations? What's the lesson there?
Oh, absolutely. The Target breach wasn't just a lesson in point-of-sale malware or basic network security. It was a stark, almost shocking lesson for many in supply chain risk management and the importance of third-party security.
I'll broaden the focus.
Massively. For CISSP candidates, the key insight here is that your PCI DSS scope and really your overall security posture now clearly extends far beyond your own four walls. It potentially encompasses every single vendor who has any kind of network access into your environment.
That's a huge expansion of scope for some companies.
It forced a fundamental rethink. It meant organizations had to start rigorously auditing the security practices of their entire digital ecosystem, including all those third parties. It was a shift many organizations, frankly, underestimated initially.
So what changed in PCI DSS itself?
As a direct result of breaches like Target and others involving third parties, subsequent versions of PCI DSS placed significantly increased emphasis on things like stricter controls around third-party remote access, requiring multi-factor authentication for all remote access into the CDE, not just admins, and much stronger requirements around network segmentation to properly isolate the cardholder data environment from less trusted networks, like vendor networks.
Yeah.
It effectively raised the bar significantly for third-party security and continuous monitoring.
Continuous monitoring became more critical too.
Definitely. The idea that an annual audit is enough just wasn't cutting it anymore. The standard pushed more towards ongoing vigilance.
Makes total sense. Okay, let's move from payment cards to personal data privacy, specifically in the U.S. Let's talk about the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act.
CCPA.
Yeah, California often leads the way on privacy in the U.S.
It seems so. This is a major U.S. privacy law enacted in 2018, with enforcement starting in 2020. It grants California residents significant new rights over their personal data. Now, who does it apply to? It applies to for-profit companies doing business in California that meet certain thresholds, either having more than $25 million in annual gross revenue or handling the personal data of 50,000 or more California consumers, households, or devices annually, or deriving 50% or more of their annual revenue from selling California consumers' personal information.
So it targets larger businesses or those heavily involved in data brokerage.
Generally, yes. And critically, CCPA defines personal information very broadly. It's not just names and addresses. It includes things like IP addresses, geolocation data, browsing history, purchasing history, biometric data, inferences drawn to create consumer profiles. Much broader than previous U.S. privacy laws. Very broad definition. What rights does it give consumers? The compliance requirements under CCPA really center around empowering the consumer. It grants California residents several key rights. The right to know what personal data a business has collected about them, where they got it, why they collected it, and who they share it with.
The right to know, okay.
The right to request the deletion of their personal data held by the business, with some exceptions.
The right to delete.
And the right to opt out of the sale of their personal data to third parties. Businesses cannot discriminate against consumers who exercise this right.
The right to opt out of sale. Got it.
So for businesses, what does this mean? It means they must update their privacy policies to clearly explain these rights and how consumers can exercise them. They need to implement clear, accessible processes for handling consumer data requests like a web form or a toll-free number. And they need to thoroughly train their staff on how to manage these requests properly and within the mandated timeframes.
So operational processes are key.
Absolutely. Now, interestingly, while CCPA doesn't prescribe specific technical security measures in the way PCI DSS does, it does mandate that businesses implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices appropriate to the nature of the personal information they handle.
Reasonable security. That sounds a bit vague.
It is somewhat vague and often interpreted as aligning with established frameworks like NIST CSF or ISO 27001, but what gives it teeth is the private right of action.
Oh, what's that?
For certain types of data breaches, specifically involving unencrypted and unredacted personal information resulting from a business's failure to implement reasonable security, consumers can sue the business directly. They can seek statutory damages of between $100 and $750 per consumer per incident, or actual damages, whichever is greater. That can add up incredibly fast in a large breach.
Wow, yeah, $750 per person could be huge.
Exactly. And the operational burden of just handling potentially thousands of individual data access or deletion requests can also be quite significant, especially for large organizations dealing with vast amounts of consumer data spread across many systems.
I can see that. Who enforces the rest of CCPA, besides the private right of action? Enforcement, beyond the private right of action for breaches, primarily falls to California's Attorney General. The AG can bring civil actions against non-compliant businesses.
Yeah.
And the penalties can be steep there, too, ranging up to $7,500 per intentional violation and $2,500 per unintentional violation that isn't cured within 30 days of notice.
So significant financial risk beyond just breach lawsuits.
Definitely. And since CCPA came into effect, you probably noticed, like everywhere online, those "do not sell my personal information" links popping up on websites and apps, usually in the footer.
Yeah, they're ubiquitous now.
That's a direct consequence of the CCPA's right to opt out. It's giving consumers a very visible way to exercise more control over their data.
Makes sense. How does CCPA map to CISSP? Well, CCPA clearly touches upon asset security, Domain 2, by requiring organizations to understand and classify the personal data they hold as an important asset needing protection.
Knowing your data.
Exactly. It heavily involves Domain 1 security and risk management because organizations need to understand these legal and policy requirements and bake them into their overall governance and risk strategy. Privacy policies need updating, processes need creating. Domain 6, security assessment and testing, becomes crucial for testing those data inventories, ensuring the processes for handling consumer requests actually work, and assessing the reasonableness of their security procedures, perhaps through privacy impact assessments.
Testing the process.
Right. Furthermore, it's closely related again to Domain 2, asset security, in terms of thinking about data retention policies, how long you keep data, and overall privacy principles.
Okay.
And it's also worth noting again, many of CCPA's core concepts, consumer rights like access, dilution, transparency, significantly overlap with GDPR, the big European data privacy regulation. This often allows organizations facing both laws to develop consolidated compliance programs and processes to meet both sets of requirements more efficiently.
So handling CCPA might help with GDPR and then vice versa.
To a large extent, yes. The underlying principles are very similar.
You can almost think of CCPA as California's Consumer Bill of Rights, specifically for their data. It's like giving citizens the keys to inspect, correct, and even erase their personal files from a company's digital filing cabinet.
That's a good analogy.
And it really drives home that compliance here isn't just about IT security tasks. It involves significant legal interpretation and building robust operational processes to actually honor those fundamental consumer rights effectively.
Absolutely. It's a blend of legal, process, and technology.
Okay, building perfectly on that, let's talk about the global titan of privacy regulation, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation.
GDPR, the acronym that struck fear into businesses worldwide back in 2018.
Right. This is the European Union's really comprehensive data protection law. It technically went into full effect in May 2018 following its adoption back in 2016. Now, what's crucially important and often misunderstood about GDPR is its incredibly expansive reach. It applies not only to organizations based in the EU, but to any organization, anywhere in the world, that processes the personal data of EU residents. Even if the company has no physical presence in Europe, if you offer goods or services to people in the EU or monitor their behavior online, GDPR likely applies to you.
That extraterritorial reach is massive.
It is. And its overarching goal is broad and fundamental, to enshrine privacy as a fundamental human right within the EU, giving individuals unprecedented control over their own personal data.
A very rights-focused regulation. What does it demand in terms of compliance? GDPR's compliance requirements are extensive, arguably the most comprehensive privacy law globally right now. Key mandates include having a specific, documented, lawful basis for all data processing activities. This isn't just implied. You need to identify one of 6 bases, like explicit consent, contractual necessity, legal obligation, etc.
Can't just collect data without a reason.
Nope. organizations must demonstrate transparency. This means providing clear, concise, easily accessible privacy notices that explain exactly how personal data is collected, used, stored, shared, and for how long.
Clear notices.
It grants individuals a powerful set of rights, many similar to CCPA, but often stronger. The right to access their data, the right to rectify inaccuracies, the right to erasure, often called the right to be forgotten, the right to restrict processing, the right to data portability, getting data in a usable format, and the right to object to certain types of processing.
A whole suite of individual rights.
A very strong suite.
Okay.
Beyond individual rights, GDPR also requires organizations to conduct data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, before engaging in any data processing that is deemed likely to result in a high risk to individuals' rights and freedoms.
Proactive risk assessment for privacy.
Exactly. And in many cases, particularly for public authorities or organizations engaged in large-scale monitoring or processing of sensitive data, it mandates the appointment of a dedicated data protection officer, or DPO.
A specific role for privacy oversight.
Yes. Now, from a security standpoint, GDPR requires organizations to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk.
Appropriate to the risk. Similar to CCPA's reasonable, but maybe with more expectation.
Generally interpreted that way, yes. While not prescribing exact controls, it implicitly points towards industry best practices like strong encryption, pseudonymization, replacing identifiable data with artificial identifiers, resilience of systems, and robust incident response capabilities.
Okay.
And critically, GDPR mandates strict breach notification. Organizations must notify the relevant supervisory authority, the data protection regulator in the affected EU country, within 72 hours of becoming aware of a personal data breach, unless the breach is unlikely to result in a risk to individuals. They also usually have to notify the affected individuals directly if the breach poses a high risk to their rights and freedoms.
72 hours. That's an incredibly tight deadline.
It is. It forces organizations to have very mature incident detection and response processes already in place. The truly challenging aspect of GDPR compliance for many, beyond the 72-hour rule, is often that right to be forgotten. Operationally, managing data erasure requests consistently across myriad complex systems, databases, and backups can be a monumental technical and process challenge.
I can only imagine trying to delete data everywhere reliably.
It's tough.
And GDPR is famously backed by, well, truly hefty fines, isn't it?
Infamously hefty, yes. We're talking about administrative fines that can go up to 4% of a company's total global annual turnover for the preceding financial year, or 20 million, whichever amount is higher, for the most serious violations, like violating core principles or individual rights.
4% of global turnover? That's potentially billions for large multinationals.
Exactly. It got everyone's attention very quickly. And we've already seen significant high-profile fines levied under GDPR. For instance, Google was fined $50 million by the French supervisory authority CNIL back in 2019, primarily for not clearly obtaining user consent for personalized advertising and lacking transparency about how data was processed across its services.
Okay, a major player hit early.
Okay. British Airways faced a proposed fine of $183 million, later reduced to $20 million due to COVID impacts, from the UK's ICO after a 2018 cyber attack exposed the personal and financial details of hundreds of thousands of customers. The ICO cited inadequate security measures as a key factor. Amazon was reportedly fined $746 million by Luxembourg's Data Protection Authority in 2021 related to advertising practices, though that's still under appeal.
Wow. So the enforcement is real and significant.
Very real. Enforcement is handled by independent supervisory authorities in each EU member state, like the ICO in the UK, pre-Brexit, now handles UK GDPR, the CNIL in France, the BFDI in Germany, etc. They have investigative powers and the authority to impose those massive fines. The financial stakes are incredibly high with GDPR.
No kidding. So for CISSP, given its scope, GDPR must touch almost everything, right?
Oh, absolutely. GDPR's reach into the CISSP domains is incredibly broad. It truly encompasses almost every single area in some way.
Okay, break it down.
For Domain 1, security and risk management, it's fundamental. Understanding the complex legal and regulatory obligations, implementing data protection policies, conducting DPIAs, that's all core governance and risk.
Right.
Domain 2, asset security, is crucial for data classification, identifying personal data, defining data retention periods, ensuring data privacy, privacy throughout its life cycle, and handling data subject requests like erasure. Domain 4, communication and network security, is involved in securing the actual data flows, especially when transferring personal data across borders outside the EU, which has specific GDPR restrictions.
Data transfer rules.
Yep. Domain 6, security assessment and testing, demands regular audits of data processing activities, testing the effectiveness of privacy controls, and assessing compliance.
Okay.
And Domain 7, security operations, is paramount for effective breach detection, rapid incident response, that's 72-hour clock, and managing security incidents involving personal data.
The operational response is key.
Absolutely. And for CISSP candidates, GDPR especially highlights the importance of privacy by design and by default. This is the concept of proactively embedding data protection principles and privacy-enhancing technologies right into the design and development of systems, processes, and services from the very beginning.
Building privacy in, not bolting it on.
Exactly. Which brings Domain 8, software development security, significantly into play. Secure coding practices need to consider privacy implications throughout the SDLC.
Wow, it really is comprehensive.
It is. I'd say GDPR forces organizations, perhaps more than any other regulation, to change their fundamental mindset towards personal data, treating it truly as a responsibility they hold on behalf of individuals, not just a business asset to be exploited. It pushes them much more towards proactive privacy controls, rather than just reactive security fixes after a breach.
That proactive mindset makes sense, especially with those potential fines looming.
Definitely a motivator.
So GDPR is like building a very strong fortress around personal data, but the rules are strict. If an intruder somehow gets inside, you have to lock the main gate immediately and report it to the authorities within 72 hours.
Good analogy.
Failing to lock it meaning failing to report a breach on time or having a wide open gate in the first place because you haven't implemented proper security like encryption or obtained valid consent. That leads to potentially really, really expensive consequences from the regulators. It's all about accountability, security, transparency, and rapid response.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That captures the essence of GDPR's impact.
Okay. Our final major framework for this deep dive takes us back to a more global, voluntary standard, ISO/IEC 27001.
ISO 27001, the international gold standard for information security management.
Exactly. This is an internationally recognized standard for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an information security management system, or ISMS. Now, unlike many of the specific laws we've discussed, ISO-X, SOX, GDPR, ISO 27001 is voluntary. No government directly mandates you get certified.
Right. It's market-driven, customer-driven, or internally driven.
Precisely. But achieving ISO 27001 certification carries immense global recognition and credibility. Its scope is incredibly broad. Any type of organization, public, private, large, small, any industry, anywhere in the world can seek ISO 27001 certification to demonstrate that it systematically manages its information security in a comprehensive, risk-based, and robust manner.
It's a framework for managing security overall, what's at its core. At its heart, ISO 27001 prescribes a systematic, risk-based approach to managing information security. It follows the classic Plan, Do, Check Act, PDCA cycle for continual improvement.
PDCA, Plan, Do, Check Act. Okay.
So the plan phase involves defining the scope and boundaries of the ISMS, establishing an information security policy, defining the risk assessment methodology, and identifying risks.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. The Do phase is where you implement the risk treatment plan, including selecting and implementing appropriate security controls to address the identified risks. You also implement training and awareness programs.
Taking action.
The Check phase involves monitoring and measuring the performance of the ISMS. Are the controls effective? Are processes being followed? This includes conducting regular internal audits and management reviews.
Measuring results.
Right. And the Act phase is about taking corrective and preventative actions based on the results of the internal audits and management reviews. You identify areas for improvement and feed that back into the plan phase, continually enhancing the ISMS.
Closing the loop, continuous improvement.
That's the core cycle. Now, for selecting controls, the standard includes Annex A. This provides a list of 114 potential information security controls, grouped into 14 categories.
114 controls. How does that compare to NIST CSP 853?
It's fewer than the hundreds in 853, and the Annex A controls are generally less prescriptive, more like objectives. However, the types of controls covered are quite similar. Asset management, access control, cryptography, physical security, operations security, communication security, etc. They cover the key areas.
Okay, similar domains, maybe less granular detail.
Generally, yes. Now, required documentation under ISO 27001 is quite extensive. You need a formal information security policy, documented risk assessment results, a risk treatment plan, and critically, a statement of applicability, SOA.
Statement of applicability. What's that?
The SOA is a crucial document. It lists all 114 controls from Annex A and requires the organization to justify which controls have been implemented and, just as importantly, justify why any controls were deemed not applicable and excluded. It shows you've systematically considered all the standards controls against your specific risks.
So it documents your control choices and rationale.
Precisely. And throughout the standard, there's a very strong emphasis on that continuous improvement cycle, regular internal audits, and formal management reviews to ensure the ISMS remains effective, adequate, and relevant to the organization's context and risk environment over time.
So it's a living system, not static.
Absolutely. And maybe the surprising insight for many organizations embarking on ISO 27001 is that achieving the initial certification is really just the beginning. The real work and the real value comes from embedding that continuous improvement cycle into the organization's culture, ensuring the ISMS truly evolves with changing threats, technologies, and business objectives.
Maintaining it is the key. How is ISO 27001 enforced, if it's voluntary? Well, enforcement comes through accredited independent certification bodies. Companies hire these external auditors to conduct rigorous audits against the ISO 27001 standard. So third-party audits for certification.
Exactly.
If the organization passes the audit, they receive the ISO 27001 certification, usually valid for 3 years, but subject to annual surveillance audits to ensure they're maintaining the ISMS.
And if they fail those surveillance audits?
If an organization fails to maintain the standards or practices outlined in their ISMS and documented in their SOA, it can lead to major nonconformities found during the surveillance audits, and ultimately, the suspension or withdrawal of their certification.
So you can lose the certification.
Definitely. And losing that certification can have significant business implications. It might affect customer confidence, disqualify them from certain contracts that require it, or even impact their ability to demonstrate compliance to regulators.
So it can be used to demonstrate compliance elsewhere.
Yes, frequently. Many organizations leverage their ISO 27001 certification as evidence that they have a robust security management system in place. For instance, when regulations like GDPR call for appropriate technical and organizational measures, having an ISO 27001 certified ISMS is often seen as a strong indicator of meeting that requirement, even though GDPR doesn't explicitly mandate ISO 27001. It provides a credible baseline.
Okay, so it's a way to build trust and potentially satisfy other requirements. How does it map to CISSP? You said it covers a lot.
Oh, it's incredibly powerful for CISSP prep because it literally covers so much of the syllabus. The very act of establishing and maintaining an ISMS following that PDCA cycle involves deep engagement with multiple domains.
Like which one?
Domain 1, security and risk management, is the absolute foundation. Defining scope, policy, governance, conducting risk assessments, risk treatment, that's all core Domain 1.
Okay.
Domain 2, asset security, is crucial for identifying, classifying, and managing information assets, which is a prerequisite for the risk assessment in ISO 27001.
Domain 3, security architecture and engineering, comes directly into play when selecting and implementing those specific controls from Annex A or other sources based on the risk treatment plan.
Choosing the controls.
Domain 6, security assessment and testing, is fundamental through the mandated internal audits, vulnerability assessments often done as part of risk assessment, and the management reviews required by the standard.
Checking effectiveness.
And Domain 7, security operations, is covered in areas like incident management, business continuity planning, often linked to the ISMS, and continuous monitoring activities that feed into the check phase.
Okay, yeah, that's really broad coverage.
It is. In many ways, you can almost see ISO 27001 as the mother document or the overarching management framework for building a truly unified, comprehensive security program. A program that can then align with and help satisfy the more specific control requirements found in many other frameworks or regulations.
That's a really great point. So if ISO 27001 is like, say, the overall process for building a really secure, well-managed house, establishing the information security management system, the structure, the maintenance plan, if you will, how does that compare to something like the NIST cybersecurity framework, CSF? Is one the house and the other the furniture, or is there a better way to visualize their relationship? They often get compared.
That's a perfect question, and the house analogy works quite well here, actually. Think of ISO 27001 as providing the overall management system for the house. It dictates how you design, build, operate, monitor, and maintain the house, the ISMS, to ensure it consistently meets security standards and manages risk effectively over time. It's the governance framework.
Okay, to how to manage the house.
Exactly. The NIST CSF, on the other hand, is more like a detailed checklist or guide focusing on what key security capabilities every room in that house needs. Its 5 core functions, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, are excellent for categorizing and assessing the specific security activities and outcomes, the furniture and security systems, if you will, within your program.
So CSF is more about the what, the capabilities, and ISO is more about the how, the management system.
That's a great way to summarize it. NIST CSF helps you understand your current security posture and identify gaps in capabilities, while ISO 27001 gives you the structured management system to systematically address those gaps, manage risks, and demonstrate ongoing due diligence.
So they're complementary, not really competing.
Absolutely complementary. Many organizations use them beautifully in tandem. They might use ISO 27001 to build the overarching ISMS structure, and then use the NIST CSF categories as a way to organize their controls or measure their maturity in key functional areas within that ISMS. It allows companies to integrate their compliance and risk management efforts very effectively.
That makes a lot more sense. Using both together leverages the strengths of each.
Precisely.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground surveying these major frameworks and standards. Now let's get really practical and talk about the real-world challenge that every cybersecurity professional, especially those aiming for CISSP, inevitably faces: the art of co-compliance.
Yes, the juggling act.
Exactly. How do organizations actually juggle multiple, often diverse requirements simultaneously without, completely losing their minds or duplicating effort everywhere? Let's illustrate with some concrete examples. Imagine a typical U.S. hospital system. They're not just dealing with one set of rules, are they?
Not even close.
They absolutely need to comply with HIPAA for all that patient PHI.
Mm-hmm.
But if they accept credit card payments in their cafeterias, gift shops, or for co-pays, they also need to meet PCI DSS requirements.
Right.
If the hospital system is publicly traded or part of a larger public entity, then SOX likely applies to their financial controls. And maybe, to build trust with partners or demonstrate robust security, they might also choose to pursue ISO 27001 certification for their core IT systems. That's potentially 4 major compliance regimes right there.
A very common scenario for healthcare. Or think about a software as a service SaaS provider, maybe based in the US but operating globally.
Okay.
They are certainly facing GDPR for any personal data they process belonging to EU residents. They likely use ISO 27001 for their overall security management and to reassure enterprise customers. They might voluntarily align with NIST CSF as a best practice. And if their platform processes payments, they'll need PCI DSS compliance too, plus potentially CCPA if they meet the thresholds for California residents. It's a complex web.
It really is. It sounds incredibly complex, almost overwhelming when you lift it like that.
It sounds chaotic, definitely. But what's remarkable, and maybe the key insight here, is why it often isn't as chaotic in practice as it might seem on the surface.
So.
Because, as we touched on earlier, there's a significant amount of overlap in the underlying controls and principles across these different frameworks.
The common ground again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Almost every single framework, whether it's a U.S. law like HIPAA, an international standard like ISO 27001, or an industry mandate like PCI DSS, demands fundamental security practices. Things like robust access control, who can get to what, strong encryption, protecting data confidentiality, effective incident response planning, knowing what to do when things go wrong, and comprehensive risk assessments, understanding your threats and vulnerabilities.
The basics are usually required everywhere.
Pretty much. And the real beauty of comprehensive training like the CISSP curriculum is that it highlights this convergence. Once you truly understand those core security principles, the why and how behind access control, encryption, risk management, the specific language and nuances of compliance across different frameworks start to become much more familiar and less intimidating. You start seeing the patterns.
So understanding the core principles unlocks the ability to navigate the different frameworks.
Precisely. It unlocks a significant efficiency dividend for organizations because you're not starting from scratch each time.
Okay, so let's dive into those key similarities and differences a bit more. What should CISSP candidates really internalize about how these frameworks relate?
Right. First, the risk-based focus. Many frameworks explicitly require some form of risk assessment as a foundational first step. We saw NIST RMF is entirely built around it. ISO 27001 mandates it. FISMA requires it annually. HIPAA demands a specific risk analysis for EPHI. GLBA requires a risk-based security program. Even GDPR, through its DPIAs for high-risk processing, mandates proactive risk assessment.
So risk assessment is almost universal as a starting point.
It's a very common thread. Even frameworks like PCI DSS or SOX, which focus heavily on specific controls, implicitly require you to assess risk when determining the scope and applicability of those controls. You need to know what you're protecting and why.
Okay, what about key differences?
A major distinction lies in the focus: data privacy versus data security. GDPR and CCPA are predominantly privacy laws. They are deeply concerned with how personal data is collected, used, shared, consented to, and the rights individuals have over that usage.
Privacy first.
Right. HIPAA, while having the security rule, is fundamentally about the privacy of health information limiting uses and disclosures. In stark contrast, PCI DSS is almost purely about data security. Its sole purpose is protecting cardholder data from compromise during storage, processing, and transmission. It cares less about why you have the data and more about locking it down.
Security focus for PCI.
Exactly. Then you have laws like SOX and GLBA, which kind of blend security with integrity and privacy. SOX cares immensely about the accuracy and integrity of financial data, demanding controls over changes in access. GLBA blends safeguarding customer financial information, security privacy, with transparency rules.
Privacy. So understanding the primary goal, privacy, security, integrity, is key.
Absolutely key to interpreting the requirements correctly. And finally, jurisdiction is vital for CISSP. You need to know which laws apply where. SOX, HIPAA, GLBA, FISMA. These are primarily U.S.-centric laws, though they can have implications for international companies operating in the U.S.
U.S.-focused.
GDPR and ISO 27001 are inherently international. GDPR applies globally to EU residence data. ISO 27001 is a globally adopted standard. PCI DSS is also global, but its enforcement mechanism works through the payment card networks themselves, not directly through government.
Global versus regional.
Right. For the listener preparing for CISSP, it's crucial to understand not just what the law is, but which laws apply to which regions, which industries, and what the specific triggers are for their applicability, like revenue thresholds for CCPA or handling EU data for GDPR.
That context is critical. Okay, that's incredibly helpful for mapping out the landscape. So, given all this complexity and overlap, how do savvy organizations actually operate effectively under multiple regulatory regimes without getting completely bogged down in redundant paperwork and processes? What does a truly unified compliance program look like in practice?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer usually lies in implementing what's often called a compliance matrix, or more broadly, developing a unified control framework or unified security program.
Okay, unified control framework. How does that work?
It starts with getting a really clear picture of your obligations. This often involves creating a single, authoritative inventory of all your sensitive data types and critical system assets, then meticulously tagging each entry by all the relevant laws or standards that apply to it.
So one inventory, multiple tags.
Exactly. For instance, you might have a database server tagged as containing medical PHI HIPAA GDPR applicable, or a web server tagged as processes credit cards PCI DSS GLBA applicable. This gives you that clear, holistic view of your combined data protection obligations.
I see. That inventory seems foundational. What's next?
The next huge efficiency gain comes from mapping requirements and implementing common controls. Instead of having separate controls for IP access logging and GDPR access logging, you implement one robust access logging solution that meets the requirements of both.
Map once, implement once.
Ideally, yes. Think about it. A strong encryption solution for data at rest, comprehensive access logs, multi-factor authentication for privileged users. These fundamental controls can often satisfy requirements across several different frameworks simultaneously. Why build 3 different MFA solutions if one strong one covers IPI, PCI, and internal policy?
Makes sense. Less duplication of effort and technology.
Precisely. Similarly, organizations consolidate their policies. Instead of having a separate HIPAA security policy, a separate PCI policy, and a separate general InfoSec policy, they develop a strong, overarching information security policy suite. This suite is carefully written to incorporate and satisfy the general policy requirements of numerous laws and standards, covering areas like acceptable use, incident response, third-party risk management, access control, etc., all in one integrated set of documents.
One policy framework to rule them all.
Kind of, yeah. It requires careful mapping, but it's much more manageable. And the same principle applies to audits and reporting. Instead of conducting completely separate full-scope audits for HIPAA, then PCI, then SOX, many organizations leverage a comprehensive framework like ISO 27001 or maybe a SOC 2 Type 2 report as their baseline audit.
Use one audit as the foundation.
Exactly. They get audited against that comprehensive baseline standard, and then they simply overlay the specific, unique requirements of the other compliance regimes, like specific IPA rules not covered by ISO or specific PCI controls, onto that foundational audit process. It streamlines the evidence gathering and testing significantly.
That sounds much more efficient, sort of like build the core house audit, then add the specific room inspections needed.
That's a great way to put it. It avoids starting from zero every time.
I really like to think of this whole co-compliance thing as maybe dancing with multiple partners at a big ball. Each partner, each regulation might have its own unique dance steps, its own specific rhythm.
Okay.
But there's often a common underlying beat or rhythm that connects many of the dances, those core security best practices like access control, encryption, logging. If you learn to synchronize your fundamental steps, meaning implement those common security controls really well, you can gracefully twirl through multiple dances, satisfying multiple partners without constantly tripping over your feet or missing a crucial beat.
That's a perfect analogy. Synchronizing the core steps allows you to handle the variations. I love it. And that brings us really nicely to the overall takeaways for CISSP candidates from this entire deep dive.
Yeah, let's bring it all together.
Fundamentally, understanding all these regulatory frameworks and standards truly means recognizing how each specific set of requirements fits logically into the structure of the 8 CISSP domains. It's about seeing the connections.
Okay, give us some specific examples again, maybe hitting each domain briefly.
Sure. Domain 1, security and risk management, is absolutely central. We saw it's the heart of frameworks like FISMA, risk assessment, ATO, ISO 27001, ISMS, risk management cycle, APA, risk analysis, GLBA, risk-based program, and even GDPR, DPIAs. Governance, policy, risk, it's everywhere.
Domain 1 is foundational, got it.
Domain 2, asset security, is heavily emphasized by regulations focused on specific data types. APA for PHI, GDPR and CCPA for personal data, GLBA for NPI, SOX for financial records, data classification, handling, retention, privacy, that's domain 2.
Protecting the specific assets.
Right. Then, domains 3, 4, and 5, security architecture and engineering, communication and network security, identity and access management, cover the bulk of the technical controls mandated by frameworks like PCI DSS, firewalls, segmentation encryption, access control, NIST CSF 853, the huge catalog of controls used by FISMA, GLBA safeguards, and the appropriate technical measures required by GDPR and HIPAA. This is the how to build secure systems.
That technical core.
Exactly. Domain 6, security assessment and testing, is crucial for the auditing and testing mandates found in SOX, internal control testing, PCI DSS, scans, pen tests, audits, ISO 27001, internal audits, and FISMA, assessment and authorization testing. Verifying controls work.
Testing and auditing.
Domain 7, security operations, is highlighted by the critical incident response, breach notification, logging, and monitoring requirements in HIPAA, GDPR, that's 72-hour rule, PCI DSS, FISMA, continuous monitoring, and SOX, log retention, keeping things secure day to day and responding to incidents.
Operational security.
And finally, Domain 8, software development security, is strongly implied, if not always explicit. Concepts like privacy by design in GDPR require security and privacy to be built into the software development lifecycle. Secure coding practices are essential for meeting SOX integrity requirements and preventing vulnerabilities exploited in PCI or HIPAA breaches. Change management in SOX also ties in here.
Building security in from the start.
Exactly. So as you study for your CISSP, I really encourage listeners to try and think of each framework not just as a dry list of rules to memorize. Think of it as both a story, understand why it exists, what societal problem or risk it's trying to solve, and then as a checklist, what specific technical and administrative requirements does it mandate to achieve that goal?
The story in the checklist. I like that.
For example, remember that IPA story is fundamentally about protecting patient privacy and trust in the healthcare system. So its checklist logically revolves around robust PHI access controls, clear patient rights, breach notification, and risk analysis related to health data. Or, for PCI DSS, its story is the defense of the payment ecosystem against card fraud. So its checklist logically centers on strict network segmentation, strong encryption for card data, rigorous vulnerability management, and secure configurations for payment systems.
Story drives the requirements.
It really does. Weaving in these narratives, understanding the why, and constantly remembering the significant overlap and common principles between these frameworks will not only help you internalize the material much more effectively for the exam, but it will also empower you to navigate the genuinely complex compliance landscape you'll face in the real world with much more confidence after you achieve your CISSP.
That's fantastic advice, connecting the why with the what. And speaking of support on that CISSP journey, as you navigate this complex yet honestly fascinating landscape of compliance and security, remember the power of community.
Oh, absolutely. Learning together is key.
For those of you listening who are currently studying for your CISSP, or maybe just want to connect with other folks who are passionate about this field, we highly, highly recommend you join or share with your network, CISSPstudygroup.com.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
It really is. An incredible resource to deepen your understanding on topics just like this one. Ask questions, share insights, and connect with fellow learners, aspirants, and even certified professionals. Check it out, CISSPstudygroup.com.
Good plug. Community support makes a huge difference.
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so, wow. We have taken a really deep dive today, haven't we, into the foundational blueprints of cybersecurity compliance. We've tried to unpack how frameworks like NIST and ISO and critical laws like HIPAA, FISMA, SOX, GLBA, PCI DSS, CCPA, and GDPR fundamentally shape the entire security landscape we operate in.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Our goal throughout this deep dive was really to give you, the listener, a clearer, more structured understanding of these essential concepts, to reveal how they map, often quite directly, to those crucial CISSP domains, and hopefully provide you with that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this vital topic.
And hopefully less intimidated by all the acronyms.
Hopefully. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with maybe a provocative thought to mull over. Consider just how quickly new regulations and compliance mandates are emerging, not just within specific countries like the US or regions like the EU, but truly globally. We see new privacy laws popping up all over the world, new sector-specific requirements.
The pace definitely feels like it's accelerating.
It really does. So the thought is, what implications does this accelerating pace of new requirements have for us, for cybersecurity professionals, for our need for continuous learning and constant adaptation? And looking ahead, how will future privacy incidents or major security breaches inevitably continue to shape and reshape this ever-winding, ever-evolving regulatory highway that we all must learn to navigate effectively?
That's a great question. The journey of compliance is certainly perpetual, isn't it? It never really ends. There's always something new around the corner.
A truly profound thought for our continuous learning journey indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of cybersecurity compliance. Keep exploring, keep learning, and definitely keep connecting with the community.
Thanks for having me. It was a great discussion.
Always a pleasure. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.